of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Or we can get gully, I'll size up your body and put some white chalk around it.
Welcome to the Single Dads of the Midwest, episode 50, a sort of landmark episode as we reach the semi-halfway point. Thank you, Sheldon, again for sending an incredible guest my way. Today I'm joined by Alex Lee, who's a former tech professional turned life coach. And we're going to talk about his path and journey down that and various tangents along the way. But without further ado, Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, first and foremost, thank you for having me on your podcast. And yeah, quick shout out to Sheldon for setting this intro up. Um, I think you did a pretty good job summing everything up, and I'm sure more things will come from this conversation. But yeah, I've been in tech for about 11 to 12 years. Started as an individual contributor, left that tech scene in a leadership role. Um, Always felt during that entire time that I had a calling for something else. And I'd say about 2 years ago, I took that step to, I call it being more alignment with what my authentic journey was meant to be. And that's where I've been for the past 2 years. And it's been an awesome experience so far.
Amazing. I've sort of had a very similar journey, maybe not with life coaching, but working in Silicon Valley, also being in that tech space and also feeling like my career path ultimately lied elsewhere. Did you know? So and I think, you're not the first person in tech, I think, no, I mean, by far to tell me about like kind of dissatisfaction and wanting to feel called to something else. But did you know that specifically you want to do life coaching? How did you get into that specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say I'm going to answer that question as a yes and a no. So um, I've known since I was 17 years old that I wanted to do something where I could help people on a very deep and meaningful way. The platform or the how wasn't very clear, but I just knew that I always had a calling for it, that I had a very strong gift for it. And I think a lot of that ties back into my own background and my personal life journey. Um, but I would say that the journey to actually becoming a life coach was a mixture of me embracing something that I've always wanted to do, but then also a bit of fate would intervene and kind of help shape that trajectory of my life. And so, it sounds like you said, like quite a few people in tech that are dealing with, frustrations and stress and unfulfillment. And that was absolutely me on my end. And so I think after 12 years or so of really just sweeping under the rug, as I say, these feelings of discontentment, you eventually hit this boiling point or this tipping point where, the opportunity cost of doing nothing is way more painful than actually trying out that dream or pursuing that thing. So it was a mixture of a lot of things that kind of ultimately led to becoming a coach. In terms of how I became a coach specifically, that was actually a stroke of fate where I had a friend mention that he had been working with a life coach. And it was almost like the minute I heard that, I was like, huh, life coach. I like the sound of that. And that kind of always stuck in the back of my head. And I think when I had that tipping point moment, it was kind of a building up to that point. But at the same time, it was a very spontaneous decision where I remember I was in a meeting with my manager at the time in our Monday morning stand-up call, and we just got done having quite an intense conversation. And I remember just sitting there after that Zoom call, and I was thinking like, I can't keep doing this. This is just a complete waste of my time. And so I literally just pulled up my computer, set in my 2 weeks notice, and said, all right, well, I'm going to just start this journey now of becoming a life coach. And so it was a mixture of spontaneity, but then also it had been kind of building underneath for quite a few years.
That makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we'll talk a lot about life coaching in just a sec. But a question that Sheldon asked was, what are some of the most important lessons that you learned while you were working in tech, whether that be technical skills or just sort of things or I guess for lack of a better term, soft skills in between this sort of
Mhm.
that exit and then coming into life coaching?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm going to answer this question, but it might not be in the way that Sheldon might be hoping. But I just gotta just say what my intuition and like what my gut is telling me, right?
Sure.
But I think one of the things that I realized actually after I left the tech space and as I started to pursue this new journey of becoming a coach is that I don't think the corporate environment is designed to foster or appreciate people's natural strengths. And the philosophy that I've always had, right, is that there are very, very beautiful gifts that every individual has. But sometimes, especially in this capitalistic society that we live in, sometimes society might not see a gift or a strength as valuable. And it can be something as arbitrary as, like, oh, this person has the ability to listen to 100 hours worth of podcasts and just ingest a bunch of data. Like you would never think that that's actually a strength. But so coming back to the original point, right, was that I think that the corporate environment or just a environment in general where you're pushing towards a bottom line isn't conducive to helping people realize what their unique actual strengths and talents are. And I share that because I didn't really realize the natural strengths and gifts I had until I left the corporate environment. And so, for example, being a incredibly good listener is a strength that I realized that I had, and it wasn't something that was able to be nourished in that corporate environment. So that I just think that in general, people need to realize that they have a very unique and beautiful gift to share with the world. And I think that if people had the courage and the clarity to actually align and design their life more closer to their God-given gifts, then they would actually feel more fulfillment and probably feel more flow in life versus feeling like they have to constantly push against the forces of the world against them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's that like classic quote, paraphrasing, but like if you judge a fish by like how it climbs a tree, or land by how it swims, right? It's not capturing value. And I think in a capitalist society, to your point, certain things are commodified and valued over others based on market value, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have an intrinsic value in the human sense. So I do think that there is this
Yeah.
sort of false um hierarchy of like skills, and there's not necessarily this um there's this mismatch, as you allude to, between like the corporate world and different skills people have. So definitely uh can agree with that. So then you go on, and I'm assuming through this journey, discover a lot about yourself and a lot about your skills, including listening. um do you wish that there was something you could tell your 20-year-old self? Like, I mean, hindsight is always 2020, but like, do you wish you would have left sooner, I guess, in your journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I actually had a conversation with a really close friend of mine quite literally, I think it was last night or yeah, it was literally last night where, he was asking me for some advice as friend to friend. And I clarify that because a coach doesn't really give advice. So I just wanted to clarify that point. But he was sharing the situation where, I could see that I think I know where he's going to end up eventually, but I think he needs to go on that journey and make those mistakes to learn and, really take insights into wisdom. And there's a huge difference, right? Of like converting insights into wisdom because that's just life experience at the end of the day. And so I'm very happy actually with the journey that I went on because I think everything happens for a reason at the end of the day. And I probably wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But if I could go back and actually share anything with my former self, it would actually be very simple. It would just I would want to just tell my younger self that I love him and that he, despite who he is or what he does, has intrinsic value. And I share that because I have worked with such a wide range of clients, right? We're talking senior executives at Fortune 500s, all the way down to small business owners, entrepreneurs, musicians, individual contributors, college students, like across the entire gambit of all backgrounds, races, genders, ages. And 9 times out of 10, when I work with someone, they come to the table with with a problem that they want to resolve or a goal that they want to get towards. But usually the thing that they bring to the table is more so a symptom of something deeper.
Mm.
And what I have found, because I'm a huge uh, proponent of principles and patterns, so I'm always looking at the underlying thing. 9 times out of 10, if you follow the root cause of where this symptom is coming from deep enough, it usually stems from some form of that individual wanting to either feel loved in some way, shape, or form, or to be able to express and give love, right? And love can be a very wooey term here, right? But so a few examples of what it means to want to receive love might be to feel respected, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel adored by whoever, to just feel like they belong to a certain culture or a tribe. And I see this so often, and I saw it in myself, where a lot of the motivations I used to have in life was actually stemmed from, in some way, shape, or form, wanting to just feel love at the end of the day. And so that is absolutely something I'd want to just reinforce and tell my younger self, like, hey, whatever you do, man, just very simply, I love you. Because I think at the end of the day, that can be a very powerful message that people need to not just hear, but feel.
No, I relate to that a lot, and there's a lot of work I've done, and like, because I'm always someone that like wants to get better and like is very hard on myself, and so definitely echo those sentiments. It's something I'm working through, um,
Yeah.
for sure. And on that note, so you going to this journey, go life coach, like exit tech, go life coaching. Um, we'll get to a slightly more controversial question on that in a second, but like, what was your process of becoming a coach? Did you have to go through like a certification process? What was that path like?
Yeah, so it is a little unfortunate that the coaching industry in general can be pretty unregulated at times. There are a few bodies within the industry that are doing their best to really create a professional industry, to create a lot of reputation and a lot of checks and balances, things of that sort. So I'll share what my journey was, but this isn't necessarily what everyone else's journey was. But
Sure.
um, so I knew at the very front that getting trained and having credentials and certifications and doing it right was really important. So the main governing body and the most reputable one globally is called ICF. So that's called International Coaching Federation. And underneath that umbrella of ICF, they have different ICF accredited coaching schools. And so the one that I coached or trained at was called IPEC. And it's one of the, I'd say, the top three coaching schools in the entire world. And it's quite a intensive training process. I think it was about 300 hours worth of training. The training from start to finish took about 12 months. So it's quite an intensive process. Um, and then from there, I did about 100 hours worth of complimentary coaching sessions to kind of like a residency to get to that point where you can start taking on clients. So that was my process from a certification standpoint and to just build the skills and the techniques and the frameworks needed to be an effective coach.
Sure. And would you mind sharing some of like the insights or what that kind of 1 year progress was like? Like, were there like exercises? Are you working with people in some sort of like kind of training capacity or like shadowing capacity? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a whole mixture of shadowing, classroom sessions, or in this instance, it was virtual. There's like individual exams you need to take. There are like individual assignments and things of that sort that you need to take. So it really replicates, in my opinion, like an MBA program because it has all the gamuts of trying to show classroom experience, but also hands-on real world experience. Um, I would say that what was ironic was I did not really know what coaching was going into it. I actually thought coaching was going to be advice giving or me like listening to someone and then telling them what I think they should do and actually orchestrating or conducting their life. You learn very very quickly, especially under ICF guidelines, that that's a big no-no. And your job is to not tell people what to do. Your job is to create a very intimate space of trust where someone feels vulnerable enough to really share what's on their mind. And it's the process of doing a few things, right? It's the process of number one, taking all that chaos and all those thoughts that you have and giving you space to put it out there. And a good coach can help transform that into insights and then from insights into wisdom. And so, as a quick example, I'd be curious to know, Alex, Um, can you tell me about a time where maybe you learned a really important life lesson
Mhm.
just through actual experience, or whether it's like a failure or a success?
Okay, I got one in mind.
Okay. So to the degree that you feel comfortable, what do you think was like the main takeaway of like that main lesson that it's like, hey, now that I've learned this, I am not going to, fall prey to this mistake again.
Sure. Yes, just for some context, it was this is like a whole other story, but I was a captain of a Quidditch team, which is a sport that they took from Harry Potter. It's not called quad ball, but at the time Quidditch and turned it into a real life sport. But basically I was in a coaching, captaining position and I guess the lesson is like being able to give feedback to better players. Because it's one thing if a player isn't doing well and then to like find ways to improve that. But I think, especially in a very competitive environment, it can be hard to give feedback to your tougher players, even though that could still be necessary for the team to succeed as a whole. And so I guess perhaps even at a deeper level, you could say being more comfortable with confrontation. Um,
Mm,
is sort of the lesson I learned because of the failure that sort of happened in some of the captaining that season for my own part.
okay. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I had no idea that Quidditch had evolved into an actual sport called quad ball. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
Um, so taking that as an example, right? You probably have experiences too, or maybe you know friends where someone just tells you what they think you should do, whether it's your parents, your significant other, your manager. And it's just human nature. Like if you just tell someone the answer, it just goes in one ear, out the other, or maybe you kind of register it on the surface and kind of like, okay, I'll kind of keep that in the back of my pocket. But there's such a huge difference between that and, for whatever reason, you coming to your own conclusion and your own piece of wisdom. And so coaching mimics that, what I call miracle process, where there's something that's happening in your life. And when you talk about it and you have a good coach that can put up a mirror and let you see what you're not seeing, something clicks. And when that thing clicks, that's the difference between telling someone what to do versus helping someone come to a very powerful insight on their own. And typically, when someone comes to an insight on their own, the actions that follow are way more sustainable and way more in alignment with just who that person is meant to be, or right, because it's helping that person do something their way, not the way someone's telling them to do it. So that's just a, I candidly forgot what the original question was, but just highlighting some of the benefits or some of the techniques used in coaching.
No, that makes sense. And on to that point, sort of you were alluding to this and sort of the more controversial aspect. Coaching is a pretty broad category. Like I feel like I could go and say I'm a coach tomorrow. I obviously wouldn't have the licensing, but it's not like being like a licensed marriage and family therapist or a social worker where there's, depending on the state, certain credentials you have to have. Um, and so how do you feel about the industry as a whole, given that it's sort of the wild, wild west? There are organizations, like you said, IFC, and there is some level of certification, but at the end of the day, it does seem like a field where like anyone can kind of go, and there's sort of at some of the extreme ends, this sort of intersection with more problematic parts. I'm thinking like sort of the Andrew Tates and other sort of self-help people coming up on YouTube. Because I think there is like benefits, and career coaches is like a more specific example, but it just seems like the whole field is as a whole is just very, it's hard to sort of differentiate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't disagree. I think we live in the era of guru shit, right? Well, like everyone thinks they want to be a guru and just want to be seen as an expert or a thought leader. So I do agree that that is rampant and absolutely exists in this time and period. Um, so I'll share two thoughts here. I kind of touched on one, but I'll share two separate threads, and hopefully that ties together. Um, so the first one is that if you are considering working with a coach, I would be very cognizant of that coach's client intake process or their process of figuring out if the two of you are a good fit for each other. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters is if you and the client are a good fit together, and if you're getting results, then quite frankly, I think that's the only thing that really matters. So results are, I think, what results should speak for themselves. But if you have a coach that just is trying to desperately, take on anyone as a client, or if you have a coach that's using like very high pressure sales tactics, um, your gut is probably going to be telling you something. And so you need to really trust your gut in that process. I also think that a really good ethical coach will put their money where their mouth is. And whether it's a free coaching session or just a authentic, meaningful conversation or something, I do think that the prospective client should be able to feel, quite literally feel, some sort of impact or miracle or value from the coach just in the interactions because a good coach is constantly being able to get results very quickly in different shapes and forms. So that would be thread number one, right? Of really be aware of like how much time they take in developing that relationship, choosing their clients. Are you actually getting value up front? So that would be the first bucket. The second bucket, in my biased opinion, is I would never work with a coach that isn't at a minimum ICF certified. And I don't just say that because I am ICF certified, but in my process of becoming a coach, I had to do, again, right, a certain amount of hours pro bono. And then I also had to receive a certain amount of coaching from coaches in training. And so I received um, coaching sessions from ICF coaches, other schools like IPEC, Coactive, and I also received coaching from non-ICF people. There is a substantial difference between a coach that is ICF certified and not ICF certified, to the point where I would actually walk out of some of these coaching sessions with these non-ICF certified coaches, candidly a little concerned of like, that's kind of concerning that someone would entrust their lives with this person because I felt like this person just told me what to do for like 60 minutes straight or just wanted to hear themselves be heard and not want to actually listen to anything that I want to express. So I think certifications is absolutely something you should consider. And you should also learn about what certs they have specifically and do your own independent research of how much schooling or how much training did that take? Because they also have like ICF lights versions where it's like, oh, in a weekend you can get ICF certified. So you actually want to look at not just if they're ICF certified, but how much training and schooling went into getting that certification.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And that's sort of a pathway towards quality control, although like to your point, like anyone could still call themselves a coach, but that doesn't mean they have all the training or certifications. On that point, how do you in this like so you finished the certification, how did you go about starting the business in terms of attracting clientele? Like what is your sort of screening process like with prospective clients and how did you find these clients?
Yeah, so there's a book out there called The Prosperous Coach. It's written by a coach called or named Rich Litvin. And that was a very influential piece of literature that influenced how I developed my practice. And that individual's main takeaway is that, he once said in his book that, he went to this conference once and he listened to all these gurus telling him how to grow his coaching business. And he said, this one person got up and said social media is the only way to do it. And then he said, right after that, this next speaker said, you got to write a book and just like build your credibility. And his point was that he sat through all these talks, and every single one of these individuals were telling people, this is how you have to grow a business. And he had this point of realization, right? Of like, uh, Earl Nightingale has that famous quote where like, if you ever don't know what to do, just walk in a room and see what everyone's doing and just do the exact opposite. So I think most people are too obsessed with listening to what gurus tell them they need to do. You need to post 10 times a day. You need to be all over social media. You need to, do all these fancy things. Rich Liffin's core message, right, is you need to find your way of doing it. Find something that's authentic and unique to you. And once you find that, it's going to be the most sustainable and impactful way to do it. And so what I found in my process was to because I was very time wealthy in this moment in my business. And I wanted to challenge myself to grow a business that was only referral and invitation only. No money on marketing, no money on, hiring lead gen companies. And it forced me to do a lot of coaching sessions up front and really show a lot of immense amount of value up front. And I think that process taught me that um, I think that process taught me what my ideal client is in those situations. And so typically before I take on any clients, I will not let a client sign on until we've had at least one or two coaching sessions, obviously complimentary. But then we do a lot of other things like something called a goal setting exercise because I want to understand the maturity level of this individual, both mentally and spiritually. But I also want to understand how committed are they to actually wanting to try to push forward and enact change. Because a lot of people say they want change, but when they actually see what it entails, that's when a whole different story comes in, right? So there's nothing fancy to my process. It's just a lot of time that I put into meeting every one of these clients. I do a lot of things where they can't fake who they are. And I want to really see to the core of who they are, where are they in life, and are they truly ready for this journey? And I'll be the first one to tell them if we're not a good fit. And it's something that a lot of my clients have seen me do time and time again because they'll send a lot of referrals my way, and I'll talk to the referrals and tell them like I don't think they're a good fit for me. I don't think they're ready for coaching in general. So hopefully that answers your question.
So yeah, no, that makes sense in terms of screening clients. Do you have a general feel for like, is there like patterns with the people you work with, or what, or like certain goals that they're looking for? What are the like? What would you say like the demographic of your clientele is?
Yeah. So, again, I've been very fortunate to work with a very, very wide range of individuals. You know, Retired CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, um, serial entrepreneurs all the way down to college students, right? So I really have seen a full gamut of the human experience in general. In terms of a demographic, I wouldn't say that there's a specific marketing demographic from, from that standpoint. The one pattern I see with all of my clients is that there's something inside of them that is a feeling of pain or frustration that they've been shouldering for a very long time. And they're at this point where they're sick and tired of it and they're finally ready to do something. And I think that's critical, right? Because the timing in which I meet someone is exactly at that point where they're at that tipping point of whatever this is, right? Like a very common example I see with a lot of my clients is that they feel like they have this deep-seated dream that they have been just stuffing down into the bottom of their existence to the point where they're too scared to even share what this dream is. They can't even vocalize it. Or it's someone that feels like they're not reaching their potential because they're trading in their dreams for the safety of a paycheck. Or someone that feels like they just have a higher purpose, but they don't have the courage to really pursue it. Right? So it's something where inside of them, they just can't take this feeling of sweeping it under the rug anymore. So that's the first one. It's the timing of that tipping point. The second one, and this might sound obvious on paper, but it's that they have the emotional maturity and awareness, and in a sense, the courage and the vulnerability to admit that this exists. Because I'm sure maybe you know someone where you can tell they're not happy, but you can also tell that they're either not allowing themselves to admit it or they're in denial. And so it's having that emotional maturity for them to realize, oh shit, I realize I'm not happy. And then the third one is I think a lot of my clients that I work with inherently are very deep and reflective type of individuals, people that ask the bigger questions, right? Of like, what's it all for? What's the meaning of life? Like that's the most stereotypical one, right? But it's people that just intuitively are very reflective. Um, because the type of coaching that I do at the end of the day is a lot of deep coaching. Because my belief is that at the core of every being is a handful of really deep rooted core issues. And if you actually focus on addressing those issues, then virtually every other symptom in that person's life quite literally autocorrects itself. And so that entails a certain level of emotional maturity and a willingness to, reflect and go really deep inside of themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. Like you said earlier, it's like getting to not just surface level symptoms, but going deeper to the root cause and then fixing that kind of fixes the rest. To that point, though, sometimes desires reflect or wants and goals reflect like a need of the times. In the last, like, let's say, I guess even this year, 2024, have there been like certain patterns and goals or just clientele that's popped up, or has it been pretty par for the course?
Yeah, I'd say that the most prevalent one that I see are um, two types of people, and I kind of already touched on them. One of them is um, the person that's been highly successful on paper and has devoted their entire life to climbing that corporate ladder. It could be an executive or just a senior individual contributor. And they get to the point where maybe they're retiring or they've accomplished and climbed the top of the ladder and they completely lose their identity because it's like, the surface level purpose that they've given themselves is now gone. And so I help in those instances, I help individuals find deeper meaning in how to create purpose so that, it's kind of like that concept of a mission statement, right? A good mission statement is something that technically can never be achieved. It's something that's always in front of you that you're always moving towards. And the second one that I find is kind of going back to what I touched on a little bit about I see a lot of different type of clients that are maybe in their late 20s, early 30s, late 30s, where they feel like they are copping out on their full potential, whether it's to really tap into that entrepreneurial spirit or that do like this very random dream that I was talking to a prospective client the other day where after a lot of work, I finally was able to get that individual to say like what their true dream was. And he said, I want to be a judge at dog shows, right? It's like these absurd things that people have forgotten, but they used to daydream about when they were younger. Or just knowing that like you have to not let your authentic self out in a certain corporate environment and you can't really let your true self shine. So that second bucket, right, are these type of clients where they've been stifling themselves for so long just because of the environment they're in, and they're sick and tired of it. And so I help those individuals find what I call their authentic blueprint. And it's not just about helping someone find their blueprint, but it's helping them find that courage to follow that blueprint. So I'd say for the most part, those would be the two types of clients that I've worked with. Um, but again, it's all over the gambit. It really just comes down to if there's something that someone feels like they've been putting off, or they're just sick and tired of feeling a certain feeling of pain or frustration, and that can come in any form, then those are the clients that I enjoy working with.
That makes sense. And on this journey of just working with a lot of people, what have you learned about people since like starting the coaching journey?
I mean, I'm going to rehash what I said earlier, but I'm going to share it with a few data points that may not be, direct data points, but I read a lot of studies and I kind of interpret them the way I want to interpret them. So, here are two examples, right? Um, I'm sure you're probably aware of this first one because it's, there's a lot of TED Talks on it, but Harvard has the longest study on happiness. And I think I'm going to completely butcher this, but um, I think the study's been going on for about 70 years now, and the researchers would follow a class of students from Harvard, and they follow them throughout their entire life, and it now proceeds into the second generation. So now they're following their kids, the families, the children, and so in total they've been following like a few hundred or I think even 1,000 people, and they've just been following them, understanding their happiness markers. And in a nutshell, what that study was able to help them find is that the number one highest metric that is going to, show that someone's going to be living a happy life was the quality of their relationships. And there's another study I remember learning when I was an undergrad. It was, I believe it happened in the 1970s. It was a study conducted at an old Romanian orphanage where researchers realized that there were a lot of children that were being severely neglected just because of the lack of resources. Neglected not just from food and water, but from human touch and from love. And what they found was that the children that were severely neglected from love and nourishment and human touch grew up with a lot of um, just underdevelopment issues, both mentally, physically, emotionally. And when I think about these two studies, I think that to me, it tells me once again, right, that love isn't this hippy dippy wooey thing. It is quite literally, in my opinion, one of the most powerful human needs out there. The ability to feel love and to give love outside of food and shelter, I would say, is integral to the human experience. And I see it every single time when I work with a client. When we get to the root of what they're really aiming for, it's love. And so, what I try to help individuals do, because a lot of times, without even knowing it, we might have a cup inside of us that we're trying to fill with external validation to fill that hole of love. But as you know, right, like what happens if you try to fill up a cup that has a hole in it? It's a losing battle. And so I help a lot of my clients with this concept of self-love, right? Of helping them understand it's okay to have this deep urge to want to be loved and to feel love. But how do we flip the script so that instead of trying to seek love externally, we help individuals to give themselves self-love? Because when you help someone get to that point, it becomes self-generating. It becomes this thing where you're no longer doing to try to receive something externally, but now you're simply being. And through the process of being, you're now attracting automatically the things that you're actually trying to pursue. So it's the weirdest self-fulfilling prophecy when you can help someone have self-love, they actually attract all the things that they're trying to pursue at the end of the day.
No, that makes sense. And I wonder if you've ever been in a situation though where sometimes like life can just throw a lot of curveballs and there's a lot of unluckiness for lack of a better term. So like I guess it's a two-parter. First, do you ever have situations where you're working with clients and you feel like they're doing the work, but they're just not getting the results that you or they would expect? Um, and then what do you do or tell the clients if that does happen in that situation?
I need to think about that question for a moment because, you know, earlier in my practice, when I did not have quite a stringent client selection process, I will be the first to raise my hand and admit that I think I took on clients that weren't ready for coaching or maybe weren't a good fit for me. And in those instances, I think my success rate was very variable. But candidly and truthfully, ever since I've put in an extreme amount of time vetting my clients with the utmost amount of care and love, I'm lucky to say that I'd say in the at least in the past 8 months or so, I actually don't think I've had a client where we haven't been able to, from a tangible standpoint, see at least 100% ROI tangibly, but then also intangibly, where they feel like their life hasn't changed in a astronomical way for the better. And I think it also comes down to that process, right? Of Tony, I think it was Tony Robbins. He has a saying, right? Of a good coach doesn't just give you what you want, they help you see what you need. And so, yes, when a client comes to me, we have a goal setting process. But very quickly, what you'll see in that journey is that the goals they set out very quickly become outdated and new goals arrive. And those are typically the new goals that we work towards in the coaching journey. Again, it's not the ones that I'm telling them, it's the ones that they're realizing, oh, this is the real thing that I want to move towards. And when we can get to that point of that authentic blueprint, as I call it, I feel like there's no perfection, but candidly, I feel like we've had a huge amount of success. But I think, again, it goes back to that qualifying process of making sure that they're ready for it.
That makes a lot of sense. Just one more question, and then I'll let you obviously plug where people can reach you if they want to know more, potentially do coaching. Is there anything on this journey that's surprised you in any way? Um, yeah, anything that's been like unexpected or you didn't expect a certain situation to happen?
Yes, I would say that, I'm smiling a little because I am surprised time and time again of how much I actually learn from my clients because I'm in a very privileged situation where if you think about it, I get a front seat view of someone deciding to go on a extremely courageous journey. And right, courage isn't defined as the absence of fear, right? Courage is defined as having fear, but deciding to embrace it. And so every single one of these journeys that my clients go on, to them, they are embracing what is most fearful or scary to them. And so it never surprises me on A, just how much courage they have. And it kind of reminds me in general of just how much courage the human spirit has if you're doing something that has a lot of meaning and purpose built around it. But then two, man, there's just times where like we're having a coaching session and they say something so profound that they didn't even know was inside of them, and they just say it, and we're both like, "Wow, that was poetry. We should write that down because that's really good." And so I'm just constantly surprised of how much I learned from my clients and just how much courage and how often they show up and do the work. And it's honestly an awesome experience to be able to see that firsthand and go on that journey with them.
Amazing. I think that's a beautiful end to the last real question. Before I let you talk about your where to reach you, any other things that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to talk about yet?
Yeah, and thank you for that opportunity to I guess tie loose ends. Honestly, again, I just want to thank you for letting me, come onto your podcast. I think you did a great job really just giving me some space to talk and express myself. I just really want to put out there, right? If anyone is listening to this and they either resonate with the words that I've shared or in some way, shape, or form, they understand what I'm trying to communicate, right? If there's something inside of you that has been screaming and you feel like you've just been sweeping it under the rug and you feel like that time is coming where it's like there is so much shit under this rug that I can't sweep anymore, then I would really like to have a authentic conversation with you. Whether we decide to work together as a coach and client, or whether we just have an authentic conversation and become friends, whatever it is, I think a lot of magic can happen when you have an authentic conversation, but actually truly have a space where you feel incredibly heard and seen. And so, my heart goes out to anyone listening to this, and I, really just want to spread some love and light out into the world, and I hope your audience can feel it at the end of the day.
No, that's a great message. And to that point, where can people sort of contact you and get started with that?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I'll share my LinkedIn profile with you, and then you can maybe share that profile link. And then also my website has a great plethora of resources, and then also that is also another way that they can reach out. So that one is alexlee.life. And I have a few exercises on there, like a wheel of life or a goal setting thing. And so if you feel like you want to at least maybe by yourself take a snapshot of where you're at in life and get a snapshot of like where you think you want to move towards, then definitely feel free to go to my website and use those free resources. And then if you feel like you want to take that to the next level and just have a conversation about it, then yeah, reach out to me either on LinkedIn or through my website.
Amazing. And we'll definitely add those to the description for this when we put it up. I also just want to thank you. It was like a great discussion. I think whether it's therapy, life coaching, or just like a good conversation with a friend, you hear about the epidemic of loneliness all the time, especially in the West. And I think there is something to be said about people feeling invisible and wanting to be able to authentically express themselves. So I think adding to that is definitely very helpful um, in sort of the state we're in. So thank you very much for coming on, and we'll make sure people can reach you and have a good rest of your night.
Thank you so much. You have a great evening as well.